All right, so now let's take a little dive into the research pool. I'll be real quick with this. All these are referenced. So the question is some of the fundamental claims, right? Is it reliable to look at single-side performance? Is it helpful within the 15% baseline? What's the counter-argument? One thing I love when people talk about science, but they cherry-pick. They only show the evidence that supports their argument. And they never look at, yeah, but there's a bunch of other research nerds out there that say this science, and you're selectively not using that science. I'm going to deal with that right here as well. All right, so first thing. I'm actually going to address the second point first. I'm going to summarize it. But several studies have shown that single-leg performance, I'm going to be very simple with this, single-leg performance is one of the best indicators of injury risk. There's many studies in the rehabilitation world that validate that. So again, we're going to look at all single-sided, so we are extrapolating a little bit to the upper body, but there's a lot of research on looking at single-side performance and comparing left to right. And then also, looking at single-leg performance is a reliable way to detect deficits in unilateral force development. That's research nerd for strength or power. So all those numbers are actual studies. I'm just going to give you a quick little side note soapbox. Just because an article or a book or a Facebook post or like this has references, numbers in it, doesn't mean they're really good references. Right? So for example, I could make a claim. I'm speaking from. So let's say Paul writes an article for the NSCA Personal Trainer Quarterly, because I'm actually the editor-in-chief of that journal. So I have to, every 4 months I have to edit articles submitted, peer review. And he says that, I'm just going to totally make something up right now. He says that people who squat a certain way are more likely to have back pain. And his reference is a blog post that Jose wrote, or an article. Could be a T-Nation article. Not good enough. Because what he's saying is some other trainer just made this claim. The way to be honest with that is to say other trainers believe that squatting this way increases back pain. But if you're going to make an objective claim, you need objective evidence, not another biased person. A lot of the stuff we see, I see 3 references, is just 3 other trainers or experts that wrote books. It's like, but there's no validation in any of those books.
If I could finally interject here, just for all of you listening to me for the first time,
yeah.
Everything he does is based upon scientific fact through the scientific method. Okay, so he's research journal-based, based upon scientists and grad students doing these in labs. He's not just taking personal opinion or 3 things he heard, like you said. So everything, the 15% was found through research that he's studied.
Yeah, you're going to see it.
You need to understand that that's the basis.
Shut your mic off real quick and turn it back on.
To our colleagues in our industry. Okay? Scientific method-based.
Appreciate you saying that. Yep, and also battle tested. I'm going to just pop it off real quick. Are we good to go to keep moving, or you need to test? Good to go. Okay. Thank you for saying that, Paul. Now, however, if he has a good study that compares, one group squats this way, one group doesn't, and after 8 weeks, years, whatever, it was a statistically significant number, developed some sort of back pain, that would be a good reference. So don't be fooled by, oh, look at them, they got 3 references there, it's got to be real. Look at the references. Sometimes people reference their own work. Tuminello. Right? Great. Go back. Now I can do that if the article that I'm referencing has the research references in it. But if it's just something I said or something somebody else said who agreed with me, that's just your own little circle there, your own little sewing circle. So every reference I have here is actual studies. All right. What about the validity of the 15% rule? Several studies in both males and females. And I'll also tell you actually in different population ages that of various sporting backgrounds have demonstrated that strength asymmetries between the right and left legs that are greater than 15% may be an indicator of increased risk of injury. Not just one study, multiple studies. That's another thing. It's not just what one study says. What does the majority say? Now, there was a 2019 review that says, you could find this paper, I've got it referenced, it's your number 8 reference, that you can't establish a clear link between strength imbalances and increased risk of injury or reduction in performance. So a lot of people, I'm sure, when this comes out, we start marketing it, I'm sure I'm going to have the scientific nerds, Nick, clearly you have not read this research review. And by the way, research review, I'm talking about like a systematic review meta-analysis. If you don't know what that is, it's a study of studies, right? So let's say each of the 3 people here have done their own research study. And it's all based on looking at unilateral strength symmetry and does it correlate with a reduction in performance or increased risk of injury. Let's say in Andre's study he had 20 participants, very small sample size, but that's all he could get, right? Carolina, let's say her study is a little bit bigger, it's 100 participants. In Julie's study, she has a big study. She's got 300 participants. But if I add those together, now I've got a pretty big sample size. And can I say, when we look at all 3 of these, what do they tell us? Do they have some consistency to it? That's more like what a review is. So that's why systematic reviews, meta-analysis are strong evidence. Some research nerds will, I'm just preparing you for this because you're going to deal with a lot of smart people, might counter that and say, yeah, well, the reviewers do have an inclusion and exclusion criteria, and people will disagree on why you included certain studies and excluded others. I won't go too far into that, but there's always interpretation in science. However, if you read those studies, that's my favorite line, not so fast, smarty pants. What all the studies that I've seen to date, and by the way, that review was written in 2019, it's very recent. And it has lots of references in it. So if you look at that one review, you'll see tons of research in it. Look at those studies. And don't just look at the conclusion, no real link, or strength imbalances don't cause, increased risk of injury. My question is, what was the degree of the strength imbalance? You know what every one of them is? Less than 15%. Look at the studies. So when trainers come up and they say, strength imbalances don't make a difference. Okay, did you read the study? Yeah. Did you pay attention to what the ratio was? So those studies do not, or papers like that, do not offset the 15% rule. In fact, they don't disprove it, they kind of bolster it. They demonstrate the reality that there is normal and expected levels of imbalance, but there's a point at which it's probably too much. And that's what we're trying to attack. All right, so most of those reported issues that say it's not a problem are less than 15%. And generally, 15% difference are not considered to be functionally significant. Several studies show that, and should not negatively impact performance such as running speed. There are studies that look at jump height, running speed, injury risk across the board in different populations. So I'm looking at a lot of research here. So again, a little saying, we don't major into minor. The biggest difference here is that 15% cutoff. Anything below that, that's minor. I'm not worried about it. I don't want it to get above that, which is why it's sometimes nice to re-evaluate every once in a while if someone's close when you evaluate them. And maybe if you're close, 14, 13%, maybe you just say, we'll give you a little more volume on that weak side. Let's try to drop that a little bit. So it also gives you a compass to make sure that you're staying there. And like I said, make sure that people don't get too caught up. I need to be perfectly balanced. Right? No, you don't. You don't write with both hands. It's just not how the body works. The other question is, does unilateral training more on one side than the other, I call it imbalanced training. I don't mean imbalance like not being one leg balance. I mean like doing more volume on one side throughout the week than the other. Does that work? Well, it's basically a matter of volume. So it has been shown that training interventions can reduce muscle imbalances, essentially, or strength asymmetries. I try to use the term strength asymmetry more than muscle imbalance, because muscle imbalance could be front to back, Could be left to right. Other people have different terms, so we're really specifically talking about strength asymmetries. Force production. And then also, if you're doing more, again, the research is mostly on lower body. But if single leg performance and deficits beyond 15% can be one of the best indicators of injury risk, then common sense should tell us that doing more unilateral type work, especially on the weaker side, can be beneficial. Well, that's what we show here. Now, this is an interesting one. You also have different types of strength. Now, we know fatigue-related injury is a big deal. You get tired, your nervous system isn't functioning as well, you get gassed. I would call conditioning fatigue resistance type training. That's what it is. And so it helps you be stronger for longer or keep the same level of strength longer. You're resisting fatigue. You're recovering quicker between bouts. If we know that weakness and fatigue in single leg landings may add increased risk of injury, what can we do to offset or make you more fatigue resistant or not get weak as early? Work on your strength. All right, that's principle of specificity. So we have a lot of evidence leading up to incorporating more single leg, and I'm going to extrapolate into single arm as well. I don't see why, if it applies to the lower body, it wouldn't apply to the upper body. But yes, there is a little bit of a leap there based on the research. So then that's our takeaway. Basically, resetting or getting people within that 15% differential would likely, based on the evidence and common sense, help increase performance and reduce risk of injury. Agree? Based on the arguments we've provided here? And let's just, again, if you're not into the science stuff, I'll kind of close with this. Principle of specificity, right? Said principle, specific adaptations to impose demands, or principle of specificity, which in simple terms is you get what you train for, or you achieve what you emphasize. Now, we know strength helps improve performance. So if you have one side that's not very strong relative to the other, it's more likely that you're not going to perform as well when you need to work off of that side. You're not going to cut as fast or be as capable of being stable when you need to use it, or be able to push as hard with that arm. Or if you have one side that's significantly weaker, it's more susceptible to fatigue than the other side. And if it's more susceptible to fatigue earlier on, it's more susceptible to a fatigue-related injury. So what do? Make it more fatigue resistance. That's also strength training. So we kind of talked about that already. That's kind of your takeaways. So that's really what we're getting at here. So we're really being more accurate with our exercise prescription. Do you need more unilateral or bilateral? For now. Until when? And do you need, if you need more unilateral, which we're kind of getting at, how much more volume do you need on one side more than the other, relative to where you stand with that 15% baseline? Right? And that's, again, the difference. A lot of people, yeah, we pay attention to detail. We say, oh, this hurts your knees, lean your torso this way, or we don't do that, we'll do this. We're good with that stuff. But when we started finding that direction, we tend to not have a compass to know. Everything tends to be the same. 2 sets of this, 3 sets of that, always the same. But what's going to separate you from the rest is, do you really need that much volume on one side more than the other? Let's look at that. You've got to evaluate that.